The baby formula aisle at Target was surprisingly crowded for a Tuesday afternoon, but Elena Martinez barely noticed the other shoppers as she stood frozen in front of the endless rows of products. Her phone buzzed with another text from her husband's attorney demanding she respond to their latest settlement offer, but she ignored it just like she'd ignored the previous 17 messages. What they didn't know was that she was no longer the scattered, sleep-deprived woman they'd been dealing with for the past 6 months. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What they didn't know could destroy them. Elena's 18-month-old daughter, Sophia, gurgled happily from her stroller, completely oblivious to the legal war raging around her custody. To anyone watching, Elena looked like exactly what her husband Marcus and his legal team claimed she was during their bitter divorce proceedings: a distracted mother suffering from extended postpartum brain fog, incapable of making rational decisions about her own future. The narrative had been carefully crafted and consistently reinforced. Marcus told their friends that Elena couldn't even remember to pay the electric bill anymore. His mother shared concerned whispers about how Elena had put the milk in the pantry and the cereal in the refrigerator. His attorney, the formidable Patricia Blackwell of Blackwell, Torres and Associates, had built their entire custody case around Elena's supposed mental incapacity. The irony was delicious, because while they'd been dismissing her as mentally compromised, Elena had been quietly completing her certification as a paralegal and studying family law with the intensity of someone whose child's future depended on it. Which it did. Elena had married Marcus Rodriguez 5 years earlier when she was a successful marketing director at a boutique firm in downtown Denver. She'd been ambitious, sharp, and completely unprepared for how motherhood would temporarily scramble her brain chemistry. The first year after Sophia's birth had been genuinely difficult. The sleep deprivation was real, the hormonal changes were real, and yes, there had been moments when she'd struggled to complete basic tasks that had once been second nature. Marcus had been supportive at first, understanding even. He'd taken paternity leave from his job as a corporate finance manager, and they'd navigated those early months together as a team. But somewhere around Sophia's first birthday, when Elena was finally starting to feel like herself again, Marcus had begun weaponizing her earlier struggles. Every small mistake became evidence of her ongoing incompetence. Every moment of normal human forgetfulness was documented and discussed with friends as proof that motherhood had permanently damaged her cognitive abilities. The marriage had crumbled gradually, then all at once. Marcus had become increasingly controlling, making all the financial decisions while claiming Elena couldn't be trusted with their budget. He'd taken over communication with Sophia's pediatrician because Elena was supposedly too emotional to discuss medical issues rationally. When Elena suggested returning to work part-time as Sophia got older, Marcus had laughed and asked who would hire someone who couldn't remember to turn off the coffee maker. The final straw had come when Elena discovered Marcus was having an affair with his colleague Jennifer Walsh, a sharp-tongued financial analyst who made pointed comments about stay-at-home mothers being intellectual parasites. When Elena confronted Marcus, he'd turned the conversation around to her mental state, suggesting that her suspicions were evidence of paranoid thinking brought on by hormonal imbalances. Elena had filed for divorce, but by then, Marcus had already been laying groundwork for their custody battle. He'd documented every instance of her forgetfulness, every emotional moment, every sign that she was struggling with the transition to motherhood. His attorney, Patricia Blackwell, was known throughout Denver for her ruthless tactics in high-asset divorce cases, and she'd immediately recognized the opportunity Marcus was presenting. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity: paint Elena as an unstable mother whose judgment couldn't be trusted, while positioning Marcus as the stable parent who'd heroically tried to hold their family together despite his wife's mental decline. They had documentation spanning 2 years, witness statements from concerned family members, and even a recording of Elena crying during a particularly difficult night with Sophia when she was teething. What they didn't have was any awareness of what Elena had been doing with her supposedly compromised mental capacity during their separation. Elena pushed Sophia's stroller through the automatic doors of Target and into the crisp October afternoon. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her own attorney, David Kim. She'd hired David 6 months earlier when the divorce proceedings began, and while he was competent enough, he'd fallen into the same trap as everyone else. He treated her like a fragile client who needed protection rather than a strategic partner in her own legal battle. Elena, we really need to discuss their latest offer. David's voice was patient but strained when she answered. Patricia is pushing for a decision by end of week, and honestly, their terms aren't terrible considering the circumstances. Elena secured Sophia in her car seat before responding. What are they offering now? Marcus gets primary custody, with you having supervised visitation every other weekend. He keeps the house, the investment portfolio, and both cars. You'd get spousal support for 3 years and your portion of his 401k, plus they'd cover your therapy costs. The therapy costs were a particularly insulting touch, Elena reflected. They were so confident in their narrative that they were willing to pay for her to get the mental health treatment they claimed she desperately needed. David, I've told you before that I'm not accepting any custody arrangement that gives Marcus primary custody. She could hear David sigh through the phone. Elena, I understand that's not what you want to hear, but we need to be realistic about our position. Patricia has a mountain of evidence about your mental state over the past 2 years. The recordings, the witness statements, the documentation of incidents where you struggled with basic tasks. A judge is going to see a pattern of concerning behavior. Elena started her Honda Civic and began the drive home to the small apartment she'd rented in the Highlands neighborhood. It was a far cry from the spacious house in Cherry Hills Village that she'd shared with Marcus, but it was hers, and it represented the new life she was building. David, what if I told you that I have evidence that could completely change the dynamic of this case? What kind of evidence? Elena had been preparing for this moment for months, but she still felt a flutter of nervousness as she approached the point of no return. The kind that proves Marcus and Patricia have been deliberately misrepresenting my mental capacity while engaging in some very questionable legal tactics of their own. There was a long pause before David responded. Elena, please tell me you haven't been recording conversations without consent. Colorado is a 2-party consent state, and any evidence obtained illegally would be inadmissible and could seriously damage our case. I haven't recorded anyone without their knowledge, Elena assured him, but I have been documenting everything, and I've discovered some interesting patterns in how Patricia operates. Did you know she has a history of making very specific strategic decisions in cases where she believes the opposing party is mentally compromised? Elena had spent countless late nights after Sophia went to sleep researching Patricia Blackwell's career, reading through public court records, and identifying patterns in her approach to family law cases. What she'd found was an attorney who had built her reputation on aggressive tactics that often crossed ethical lines, but who'd been careful enough to avoid serious consequences. Elena, I need you to be very careful about making accusations against Patricia Blackwell. She's one of the most respected family law attorneys in Colorado, and suggesting she's engaged in unethical behavior without solid proof could result in a defamation lawsuit that would destroy any remaining leverage we have. That was exactly the response Elena had expected. Everyone was so invested in the narrative of her incompetence that they couldn't imagine she might have developed expertise of her own. David, I need you to trust me on this. I know everyone thinks I'm struggling mentally, but I've been using this time productively.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've completed a paralegal certification program, I've studied Colorado family law extensively, and I've uncovered information that could change everything about this case. Another pause, longer this time. You completed a paralegal certification? When? Online program through Denver Community College. I finished last month. Elena turned onto her street, noting the black sedan parked across from her apartment building. Patricia's investigator had been following her sporadically for weeks, documenting her daily routines as part of their custody evaluation. I've also been working with a private investigator of my own. Elena, why didn't you tell me about any of this? Because you would have tried to stop me, Elena thought, but didn't say. Because you're part of a system that sees struggling mothers as damaged goods rather than human beings dealing with temporary challenges. Because everyone in this case has been so invested in the narrative of my incompetence that they've stopped seeing me as a strategic threat. I needed to be sure of what I'd found before involving you. But David, I need you to schedule a meeting with Patricia for this Friday. Tell her I'm ready to discuss a settlement, but that I want to present some additional information first. What kind of additional information? Elena pulled into her parking space and watched as the investigator in the black sedan pretended to read a newspaper. The kind that's going to make Patricia very nervous about proceeding to trial. After hanging up with David, Elena carried Sophia upstairs to their apartment and settled her daughter in the living room with her favorite blocks. The apartment was small, but efficiently organized, with a dedicated workspace in the corner where Elena had spent months preparing for this moment. Her laptop sat open to a folder containing hundreds of documents, screenshots, and carefully organized evidence that would soon turn her divorce case upside down. Elena had discovered early in her marriage that Marcus was careless with his digital security. He used the same password for multiple accounts, left his laptop unlocked when he went to the bathroom, and had never changed the shared passwords they'd established for household accounts. During their separation, when he'd moved out but hadn't yet changed his email password, Elena had noticed something interesting in his deleted items folder. Marcus had been corresponding with Patricia Blackwell for 3 weeks before Elena even knew he was considering divorce. The emails revealed a calculated strategy to document Elena's struggles and present them as evidence of permanent mental incapacity. More damaging, they showed Patricia advising Marcus on specific ways to trigger Elena's stress responses and create incidents that could be used against her in court. But that was just the beginning of what Elena had uncovered. Patricia Blackwell had built her career on representing high-net-worth individuals in contentious divorce cases, and she developed a particular specialty in cases involving mothers she deemed mentally unstable. Elena's research had revealed a pattern spanning 15 years. Patricia consistently pushed narratives about maternal mental health that went far beyond the evidence that supported, often relying on outdated and sexist assumptions about postpartum psychology. More concerning, Elena had found evidence that Patricia had relationships with specific mental health professionals who could be counted on to provide evaluations that supported her preferred narratives. Dr. Michael Harrison, the psychologist who'd evaluated Elena and concluded she was suffering from severe postpartum depression with lingering cognitive effects, had provided remarkably similar diagnoses for 17 other mothers in Patricia's cases over the past 5 years. Elena had cross-referenced the court records with Dr. Harrison's billing records, which were publicly available through insurance database searches, and found a pattern of unusual compensation arrangements. Patricia's clients were paying Dr. Harrison significantly more than standard rates for psychological evaluations, and the payments were often structured in ways that suggested additional services beyond the documented assessments. The smoking gun had come when Elena discovered that Dr. Harrison had never actually completed the specialized training in postpartum mental health that he claimed on his credentials. His certification had been revoked 2 years earlier by the Colorado Board of Psychology for misrepresenting his qualifications, but he'd continued practicing by carefully limiting his work to legal evaluations that didn't require active licensing in therapeutic practice. Elena had documented everything meticulously, creating a file that not only proved Marcus and Patricia had been deliberately manipulating the evaluation process, but also revealed a broader pattern of potentially criminal misconduct that could implicate Patricia in multiple cases. The apartment's doorbell rang, interrupting Elena's review of her evidence. Through the peephole, she could see a woman in an expensive suit holding a manila envelope. She recognized her immediately from the courthouse. Jessica Torres, Patricia Blackwell's junior partner and apparent messenger service. Ms. Martinez? Jessica's voice was crisp and professional when Elena opened the door. I'm Jessica Torres from Blackwell Torres & Associates. I have some documents that require your immediate attention. Elena accepted the envelope, but didn't open it. What kind of documents? A motion for emergency custody modification. We're asking the court to immediately suspend your unsupervised visitation with Sophia based on new evidence that's come to light regarding your mental state. Elena felt her heart rate spike, but forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of escalation she'd been expecting as they got closer to trial. What new evidence? Jessica's smile was coldly professional. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics, but I will say that your recent behavior has raised additional concerns about your judgment and stability. The motion will be heard tomorrow morning at 9. After hanging up with David, Elena carried Sophia upstairs to their apartment and settled her daughter in the living room with her favorite blocks. The apartment was small, but efficiently organized, with a dedicated workspace in the corner where Elena had spent months preparing for this moment. Her laptop set open to a folder containing hundreds of documents, screenshots, and carefully organized evidence that would soon turn her divorce case upside down. Elena had discovered early in her marriage that Marcus was careless with his digital security. He used the same password from multiple accounts, left his laptop unlocked when he went to the bathroom, and had never changed the shared passwords they'd established for household accounts. During their separation, when he'd moved out but hadn't yet changed his email password, Elena had noticed something interesting in his deleted items folder. Marcus had been corresponding with Patricia Blackwell for 3 weeks before Elena even knew he was considering divorce. The emails revealed a calculated strategy to document Elena's struggles and present them as evidence of permanent mental incapacity. More damaging, they showed Patricia advising Marcus on specific ways to trigger Elena's stress responses and create incidents that could be used against her in court. But that was just the beginning of what Elena had uncovered. Patricia Blackwell had built her career on representing high-net-worth individuals in contentious divorce cases, and she'd developed a particular specialty in cases involving mothers she deemed mentally unstable. Elena's research had revealed a pattern spanning 15 years. Patricia consistently pushed narratives about maternal mental health that went far beyond the evidence that supported, often relying on outdated and sexist assumptions about postpartum psychology. More concerning, Elena had found evidence that Patricia had relationships with specific mental health professionals who could be counted on to provide evaluations that supported her preferred narratives. Dr. Michael Harrison, the psychologist who'd evaluated Elena and concluded she was suffering from severe postpartum depression with lingering cognitive effects, had provided remarkably similar diagnoses for 17 other mothers in Patricia's cases over the past 5 years. Elena had cross-referenced the court records with Dr. Harrison's billing records, which were publicly available through insurance database searches, and found a pattern of unusual compensation arrangements. Patricia's clients were paying Dr. Harrison significantly more than standard rates for psychological evaluations, and the payments were often structured in ways that suggested additional services beyond the documented assessments. The smoking gun had come when Elena discovered that Dr. Harrison had never actually completed the specialized training in postpartum mental health that he claimed on his credentials. His certification had been revoked 2 years earlier by the Colorado Board of Psychology for misrepresenting his qualifications, but he'd continued practicing by carefully limiting his work to legal evaluations that didn't require active licensing in therapeutic practice. Elena had documented everything meticulously, creating a file that not only proved Marcus and Patricia had been deliberately manipulating the evaluation process, but also revealed a broader pattern of potentially criminal misconduct that could implicate Patricia in multiple cases. The apartment's doorbell rang, interrupting Elena's review of her evidence. Through the peephole, she could see a woman in an expensive suit holding a manila envelope. She recognized her immediately from the courthouse. Jessica Torres, Patricia Blackwell's junior partner and apparent messenger service. Ms. Martinez? Jessica's voice was crisp and professional when Elena opened the door. I'm Jessica Torres from Blackwell Torres and Associates. I have some documents that require your immediate attention. Elena accepted the envelope but didn't open it. What kind of documents? A motion for emergency custody modification. We're asking the court to immediately suspend your unsupervised visitation with Sophia based on new evidence that's come to light regarding your mental state. Elena felt her heart rate spike, but forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of escalation she'd been expecting as they got closer to trial.
The emergency hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning, which meant Elena had less than 18 hours to prepare a response that would not only prevent the suspension of her custody rights, but also begin her counterattack against Patricia's entire strategy. Elena opened her laptop and began typing. The response she was preparing would be unlike anything Patricia Blackwell had seen before, because it would come from a paralegal certified mother who had spent months studying both family law and Patricia's own weaknesses. The Denver County Courthouse was buzzing with early morning activity when Elena arrived the next day, David Kim trailing behind her with an expression of barely concealed anxiety. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing the evidence Elena had shared with him, and his worldview had been fundamentally shaken by what she'd uncovered. "Elena, are you absolutely sure about this approach?" David whispered as they walked through the courthouse corridors. "What you're proposing is incredibly aggressive, and if we're wrong about any of the details, it could backfire spectacularly." Elena adjusted the strap of her briefcase, which contained 3 years' worth of research and documentation that would either vindicate her completely or destroy any remaining credibility she had with the court. "David, they're asking for my parental rights to be suspended based on manufactured evidence. We don't have the luxury of being cautious anymore." They entered the courtroom where Judge Margaret Chen was presiding over family court matters. Elena had researched Judge Chen extensively and knew she had a reputation for being thorough, fair, and particularly intolerant of attorneys who tried to manipulate her court. Patricia Blackwell was already seated at the plaintiff's table, her silver hair perfectly styled and her confidence radiating across the room. Marcus sat beside Patricia looking uncomfortable but determined. He'd lost weight since their separation and had the appearance of a man under significant stress. Elena felt a fleeting moment of sympathy for him before remembering the email she'd found detailing his collaboration in Patricia's strategy to paint her as mentally unstable. "Your Honor," Patricia began when Judge Chen called the case, "we're here today because we have serious concerns about Miss Martinez's mental stability and her fitness to have unsupervised access to the minor child. Over the past several months, Miss Martinez has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior that suggests her postpartum mental health issues have not resolved as previously hoped." Patricia's presentation was masterful, weaving together the surveillance photos, witness statements, and Dr. Harrison's psychological evaluation into a narrative of progressive mental deterioration. She painted Elena as a woman so disconnected from reality that she was potentially dangerous to her own child. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Miss Martinez has been engaging in stalking behavior toward my client, appearing at locations where she knows he will be present, and creating uncomfortable situations that suggest an unhealthy fixation on the failed marriage rather than focus on her daughter's well-being." When Patricia finished her presentation, Judge Chen turned to David. "Mr. Kim, how does your client respond to these allegations?" David stood, his nervousness evident but his voice steady. "Your Honor, my client categorically denies these allegations, and we believe the evidence will show that this motion is part of a broader pattern of misconduct by opposing counsel that goes far beyond this case." Elena saw Patricia's eyebrows raise slightly at the unexpected challenge in David's tone. "Your Honor," David continued, "we would like to present evidence that the psychological evaluation relied upon by the plaintiff was conducted by a professional who has misrepresented his credentials and who has been providing biased evaluations in exchange for unusually high compensation from Miss Blackwell's firm." The courtroom fell silent. Patricia's confident expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "Your Honor," Patricia interjected, "these are serious accusations being made without foundation. Dr. Harrison is a respected professional who has provided psychological evaluations for this court for many years." Judge Chen raised her hand for silence. "Mr. Kim, you're making some very serious allegations. I hope you have substantial evidence to support them." David glanced at Elena, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Your Honor, we do. We also have evidence that Miss Blackwell has been advising her client on how to create situations that would make my client appear unstable, and that the surveillance evidence presented today was obtained through tactics that may constitute harassment." Patricia stood abruptly. Your Honor, I object to these baseless accusations. Mr. Kim is clearly attempting to deflect from his client's mental health issues by making wild claims about my professional conduct. Judge Chen leaned back in her chair, clearly recognizing that this case had just become far more complicated than a routine custody modification. Mr. Kim, I'm going to give you an opportunity to present your evidence, but I want to be very clear that if you cannot substantiate these claims, there could be serious consequences for both you and your client. Elena felt her heart pounding as David opened their briefcase and began distributing copies of the documentation she'd spent months gathering. This was the moment that would either vindicate everything she'd worked for or destroy her completely. Your Honor, I'd like to call Miss Martinez to testify on her own behalf. Elena stood and walked to the witness stand, acutely aware that Patricia was studying her with new interest. The woman who had dismissed her as mentally incompetent was beginning to realize that she might have seriously underestimated her opponent. Miss Martinez, David began, can you tell the court about your educational activities during your separation from your husband? Elena took a deep breath and began to speak. Your Honor, while my husband and his attorney were documenting my struggles with new motherhood, I was completing a paralegal certification program through Denver Community College. I graduated with a 3.9 GPA last month. She saw Marcus's face pale as this information registered. He had no idea she'd been studying law while he thought she was struggling to function as a mother. I also conducted extensive research into family law, particularly as it relates to custody cases involving allegations of maternal mental health issues. During this research, I discovered some troubling patterns in how Miss Blackwell handles these types of cases. Elena presented her evidence methodically, walking the court through her documentation of Patricia's relationship with Dr. Harrison, the pattern of similar diagnoses in unrelated cases, and the billing irregularities that suggested additional compensation beyond standard evaluation fees. Most importantly, Your Honor, I discovered that Dr. Harrison's certification in postpartum mental health evaluation was revoked by the Colorado Board of Psychology 2 years ago for misrepresenting his qualifications. He has continued to provide evaluations for legal proceedings by limiting his practice to areas that don't require active therapeutic licensing. The courtroom was completely silent as Elena continued her testimony, presenting evidence that Patricia had been using compromised professionals to provide biased evaluations in multiple cases spanning several years. Furthermore, Your Honor, I have documentation showing that Miss Blackwell advised my husband on specific strategies to trigger stress responses in me that could then be documented as evidence of mental instability. These emails show a deliberate plan to manufacture evidence rather than simply document existing conditions. Patricia's face had gone from confident to alarmed as Elena presented email after email showing the coordination between her and Marcus to create situations that would make Elena appear unstable. When Elena finished her testimony, Judge Chen called for a brief recess. During the break, Elena could see Patricia having an intense, whispered conversation with Marcus, whose face had gone completely white. When court resumed, Judge Chen's expression was severe. Miss Blackwell, I've reviewed the evidence presented by Miss Martinez, and I have serious concerns about the conduct alleged in these documents. Before I rule on your motion, I need to understand your response to these allegations. Patricia stood, her earlier confidence completely gone. Your Honor, I categorically deny any improper conduct in this case or any other. The evidence Miss Martinez has presented appears to be a collection of misinterpretations and coincidences that she has woven into a conspiracy theory. Miss Blackwell, are you telling this court that the emails with your signature discussing strategies to trigger Miss Martinez's stress responses are fabricated? Patricia hesitated for just a moment too long. Your Honor, any communications between my client and myself regarding his observations of his wife's mental state were appropriate legal strategy based on his legitimate concerns. Judge Chen's expression darkened. Miss Blackwell, advising a client on how to deliberately cause distress to the opposing party in order to manufacture evidence is not appropriate legal strategy. It's potential misconduct that I will be reporting to the Colorado Bar Association. Elena felt a surge of vindication as she watched Patricia's carefully constructed case collapse in real time.
But she also knew this was just the beginning of a much larger confrontation. Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, the evidence regarding Dr. Harrison's credentials is extremely troubling. I am ordering an immediate investigation into his qualifications and suspending acceptance of any evaluations he has provided in family court cases pending resolution of this matter. Patricia was now visibly shaken, but she made one final attempt to salvage her position. Your Honor, regardless of these allegations, the core concern remains Miss Martinez's fitness as a mother. Even if there were irregularities in how evidence was gathered, that doesn't change the fundamental issues with her mental stability. Elena watched Judge Chen's face and realized the judge was about to deliver a ruling that would change everything about her case. Miss Blackwell, the evidence suggests that what you've characterized as mental instability is actually a mother dealing with normal postpartum adjustment while simultaneously educating herself in legal matters relevant to her case. The fact that Miss Martinez completed a paralegal certification while caring for an infant suggests remarkable focus and capability, not mental decline. Judge Chen's voice grew stern as she continued. Moreover, the evidence of coordination between you and Mr. Rodriguez to manufacture incidents that could be used against Miss Martinez raises serious questions about the authenticity of all evidence presented in this case. Elena felt tears of relief beginning to form as she realized the judge was not only denying Patricia's motion, but was seeing through the entire strategy that had been used against her. Therefore, I am denying the motion for emergency custody modification. Additionally, I am ordering a complete review of this case file and all related documentation. Miss Blackwell, you and your client have seriously damaged your credibility with this court, and I will be considering sanctions for misconduct. The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations as the magnitude of Judge Chen's ruling became clear. Patricia Blackwell, one of Denver's most feared family law attorneys, had just been publicly humiliated and faced potential bar discipline for her tactics. But Elena knew this was only the end of the first phase of her counterattack. Patricia would regroup and come back with new strategies, and Elena needed to be prepared for whatever came next. As they left the courthouse, David was effusive in his praise for Elena's preparation and strategic thinking. Elena, what you accomplished in there was remarkable. I've never seen Patricia Blackwell so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Elena smiled, feeling truly confident for the first time in months. David, that was just the opening move. Patricia has built her career on underestimating mothers like me. She's about to learn that baby brain is just a temporary condition, but being underestimated is a permanent advantage. The real battle was just beginning, and Elena had spent months preparing for a war that Patricia Blackwell never saw coming. The victory in Judge Chen's courtroom felt surreal as Elena walked through the courthouse parking garage with David, but she knew Patricia Blackwell well enough by now to understand that a wounded predator was far more dangerous than a confident one. Patricia had built her reputation on never losing cases like this, and the public humiliation she'd just suffered would demand swift and ruthless retaliation. Elena's phone began buzzing with notifications before they even reached David's car. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize, social media friend requests from reporters, and missed calls from local news stations. Word was already spreading through Denver's legal community about the dramatic courtroom confrontation, and Elena realized that her carefully maintained privacy was about to become a casualty of her victory. Elena, we need to talk about media strategy, David said as he unlocked his Mercedes. This story is going to be everywhere by tonight, and Patricia will absolutely try to control the narrative. We need to get ahead of it. Elena strapped Sophia into the car seat David had borrowed for the day, her mind already racing through the implications of public exposure. She'd spent months operating in the shadows, gathering evidence while everyone dismissed her as mentally compromised.
Now she'd be thrust into the spotlight as the underdog mother who'd outsmarted one of Colorado's most feared attorneys. What kind of media attention are we talking about? Elena asked as David started the car. Patricia has connections throughout the local media, and she's not going to let this stand without a fight. She'll paint you as an obsessed ex-wife who manipulated legal proceedings through elaborate conspiracy theories. She'll say the evidence was taken out of context and that you're still suffering from postpartum mental health issues that make you paranoid and vindictive. Elena nodded, having anticipated this exact response. What about the evidence we presented? Dr. Harrison's false credentials, the emails showing coordination between Patricia and Marcus? All true, but Patricia is skilled at damage control. She'll claim the emails were misinterpreted, that Dr. Harrison's credential issues were unknown to her firm, and that your obsessive research into her practice proves you're unstable rather than thorough. They drove in silence for several minutes while Elena processed the new reality of her situation. Victory in court was just the beginning of a much more complex battle that would now play out in public view. Elena's phone rang with a call from a number she didn't recognize. Against David's advice, she answered. "Ms. Martinez, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I understand you were involved in a dramatic custody hearing this morning that resulted in misconduct allegations against Patricia Blackwell. Would you be willing to provide a statement?" Elena's blood went cold. Jennifer Walsh was Marcus's colleague and former affair partner, the woman whose relationship with Marcus had precipitated Elena's discovery of his infidelity. Jennifer was now working as a reporter, apparently having left the financial services industry sometime during Elena's separation. "I have no comment at this time," Elena said carefully. "Ms. Martinez, sources tell me that you've made some very serious accusations against one of Denver's most respected family law attorneys. Don't you think the public has a right to know if there's misconduct happening in our family court system?" The question was reasonable on its surface, but Elena recognized the trap. Jennifer was positioning herself as a concerned journalist while actually working to gather information that could be used against Elena in future proceedings. "As I said, I have no comment. Please don't contact me again." Elena hung up and immediately called David. "We have a problem. Jennifer Walsh, Marcus's former affair partner, is now working as a reporter, and she just called, asking for a statement about today's hearing." David's response was immediate and concerned. "That's a massive conflict of interest. She can't ethically cover a story involving her former lover's custody case." "But Elena, the fact that she called you directly suggests she's not operating in a traditional journalistic capacity." "Meaning what?" "Meaning Patricia probably reached out to her as soon as we left the courthouse. Jennifer's not investigating this story, she's helping to shape the narrative against you." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that had plagued her throughout the custody battle, but this time she recognized it as anger rather than anxiety. Every time she thought she understood the scope of the conspiracy against her, it expanded to include new players and more sophisticated tactics. When Elena arrived home at her apartment, she found 3 news vans parked on her street and a cluster of reporters gathered near the building entrance. Her neighbors were standing on their balconies watching the commotion, and Elena realized that her carefully constructed quiet life was officially over. She called David from her car. "I can't get into my building without running a media gauntlet. What do I do?" "Drive to my office. We'll figure out a plan there, and I'll have my assistant arrange for you to stay somewhere else tonight until this dies down." As Elena drove away from her neighborhood, she noticed a familiar black sedan following her at a distance. Patricia's investigator was still conducting surveillance, probably hoping to capture footage of Elena appearing unstable or paranoid that could be used to support claims that she was losing touch with reality. Elena made a deliberate decision to drive directly to the Denver Public Library's main branch downtown. If she was going to be followed and potentially filmed, she wanted the footage to show her engaging in normal, responsible behavior. She spent an hour in the children's section reading to Sophia while researchers and students worked quietly around them. The peaceful normalcy of the library felt surreal given the chaos that was unfolding in her legal and personal life, but it also reminded Elena of what she was fighting for. Sophia deserved a stable, loving home with a mother who could provide for her both emotionally and intellectually. Elena had proven she could do both, but the battle to secure that future was far from over. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoyed your performance in court today. Unfortunately, Judge Chen won't be presiding over your final hearing. Looking forward to our next round. PB." The message was obviously from Patricia, though she'd been careful not to send it from her professional accounts.
The reference to Judge Chen not presiding over future hearings was particularly concerning, as it suggested Patricia had influence over judicial assignments that Elena hadn't anticipated. Elena forwarded the text to David along with her own analysis. This suggests Patricia can influence which judge handles our case going forward. We need to research the other family court judges and understand their relationships with Patricia's firm. David's response came quickly. Already on it. Judge Chen's calendar shows she's been assigned to a complex commercial litigation case that will keep her busy for the next 3 months. Judge William Hartwell will likely take over family court matters, and he has a very different reputation than Judge Chen. Elena Googled Judge Hartwell while Sophia napped in her stroller beside the library computer terminal. What she found was concerning. Judge Hartwell had been on the bench for 15 years and had a reputation for traditional views on family structure.
He'd written several opinions that showed deference to mothers in custody cases, but only when those mothers conformed to conservative ideals of maternal behavior. More troubling, Elena found news articles about cases where Judge Hartwell had been criticized by women's rights groups for accepting expert testimony that relied on outdated psychological theories about maternal mental health. He seemed particularly susceptible to arguments that mothers who challenged traditional gender roles were inherently unstable. Elena realized that Patricia's confidence about their next round made perfect sense. Judge Hartwell would be far more receptive to arguments about Elena's mental state, especially if they were presented by experts who appeared credible on the surface. Elena's research was interrupted by a commotion near the library entrance. Through the large windows, she could see reporters gathering outside, apparently having tracked her location. She gathered Sophia and her belongings quickly, but realized she was effectively trapped in the building. A librarian approached her with a concerned expression. "Excuse me, are you Elena Martinez? There are reporters outside asking about you, and we're concerned about disruption to our patrons." Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks as other library users began staring in her direction. "I'm sorry for the disturbance. I was just trying to find a quiet place to work with my daughter." "Is there a back exit I could use?" Elena asked quietly. The librarian, a woman about Elena's age with kind eyes, nodded. "Follow me. And for what it's worth, I saw the news report about your court hearing. What you did took incredible courage." As Elena followed the librarian through a maze of back corridors, she realized that public opinion might be more complex than Patricia anticipated. While some people would certainly view Elena's actions as those of an unstable woman seeking revenge, others might see her as a mother fighting for her rights against a corrupt system. Elena emerged from the library's loading dock into an alley that connected to a side street where she'd parked her car. As she drove away, she could see the reporters still gathered at the main entrance, waiting for her to emerge. Elena's phone rang with a call from David. "Elena, where are you? We need to meet immediately. Patricia has filed another motion, and this one is much more serious than the custody modification." "What kind of motion?" "She's asking for you to be held in contempt of court for allegedly tampering with evidence and suborning perjury. She claims that the emails you presented were obtained illegally and that you've been engaging in systematic harassment of her client and her firm." Elena felt her stomach drop. "David, you know that's not true. Everything I presented was obtained legally, and I documented the sources of all my evidence." "I believe you, Elena, but Patricia has crafted this motion very carefully. She's arguing that your access to Marcus's emails constituted unauthorized computer access, which could be a felony. She's also claiming that your investigation into Dr. Harrison constituted harassment and defamation of a licensed professional." Elena pulled over in a grocery store parking lot, needing to focus completely on David's words. What are the potential consequences if she succeeds? Criminal charges, potential jail time, and immediate suspension of all custody rights pending criminal resolution. Elena, this is Patricia's nuclear option. She's trying to destroy you completely rather than risk losing the case on its merits. Elena sat in her car holding her sleeping daughter and realized that Patricia had just escalated their conflict to a level she hadn't anticipated. This was no longer just about custody or even professional misconduct. Patricia was now trying to have Elena criminally prosecuted for the investigative work that had exposed Patricia's unethical practices. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully.
Everything I'm about to tell you is true, and I have documentation to prove it. But before I share it, I need to know if you're prepared to fight Patricia Blackwell to the end, regardless of how ugly this gets. There was a long pause before David responded. Elena, what haven't you told me? Dr. Harrison isn't the only compromised professional Patricia has been using. I found evidence of a broader network involving court-appointed custody evaluators, child psychologists, and even some judges. What we exposed today is just the tip of the iceberg. Elena could hear David's sharp intake of breath. Elena, please tell me you're not suggesting that judges are involved in this conspiracy. I'm not suggesting it, David. I'm stating it as a fact. Judge Hartwell, who will likely take over our case, has been receiving payments from a legal education foundation that's funded by Patricia's firm and several others. The payments are structured as speaking fees and continuing education stipends, but they create a clear financial relationship between Patricia and the judge who will be deciding our case. Elena had discovered the connection between Judge Hartwell and Patricia's firm during her research into the broader pattern of custody cases. The financial relationships were carefully structured to appear legitimate, but the timing and amounts suggested coordination that went beyond normal professional interactions. Elena, if what you're saying is true, this goes far beyond family law misconduct. This could be a criminal conspiracy involving corruption of the judicial system, which is exactly why Patricia is trying to have me arrested before I can present this evidence. She knows that if this gets out, it won't just destroy her career, it could bring down a significant portion of Denver's family court system. Elena realized that her investigation had inadvertently uncovered something much larger than she'd been looking for. What had started as research into her own custody case had revealed a systematic corruption of the legal processes designed to protect children and families. David, I need you to make a decision right now. Are you willing to take on not just Patricia Blackwell, but potentially several judges, court officials, and other attorneys who have been participating in this system? Because that's what we're talking about now.
David's response came after a long pause. Elena, the ethical implications of what you're describing are staggering. If even half of what you found is true, we have an obligation to report it to authorities, regardless of how it affects your custody case. I agree, but we need to be strategic about how we proceed. Patricia is trying to have me criminally charged specifically to prevent this evidence from being presented. If we're going to expose this system, we need to do it in a way that protects the evidence and ensures it reaches the right people. Elena had been thinking about this moment for weeks, knowing that eventually her investigation would reach a point where she'd have to decide between protecting herself and exposing the broader corruption she'd discovered. David, I've been in contact with an investigative journalist who specializes in judicial corruption. She's been researching similar patterns in other states, and she's interested in Colorado. But she needs someone willing to go on the record with specific evidence and personal testimony. Elena, going public with these allegations could make you a target for retaliation that goes far beyond what Patricia can do. You could be exposing yourself and Sophia to serious danger. Elena had considered this risk extensively, but she'd also realized that staying silent might be even more dangerous. If Patricia succeeded in having her criminally charged, Elena would lose not just custody of Sophia, but any ability to expose the system that had victimized both of them. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you think I'm mentally stable? The question seemed to surprise David. Elena, after what you've accomplished over the past few months, I think you're one of the most mentally sharp people I've ever worked with. Why are you asking? Because Patricia's entire strategy has been based on convincing everyone that I'm mentally compromised. Judges, attorneys, reporters, even some friends and family members have believed that narrative. But you've seen the evidence I've gathered. You've watched me present it logically and comprehensively. Do you think someone with serious mental health issues could have accomplished what I've done? Elena could hear David thinking through her question. Elena, what you've accomplished requires not just mental stability, but exceptional intelligence, organization, and strategic thinking. The idea that you're mentally compromised is not just wrong, it's absurd. Then we need to make sure that becomes the narrative going forward. Patricia has built her case on the assumption that no one would believe a supposedly unstable mother could outmaneuver an experienced attorney. We need to flip that script completely. Elena's phone buzzed with another text from an unknown number. Your 15 minutes of fame are almost up. By tomorrow morning, you'll be in handcuffs, and Sophia will be safely away from your delusions. Some battles aren't worth winning. PB. Elena forwarded the text to David, along with a message. Patricia is escalating because she's desperate. That means we're winning, but it also means she's going to get more dangerous. Elena drove to David's law office through downtown Denver, taking a circuitous route to ensure she wasn't being followed. The afternoon rush hour traffic provided good cover, and she used the time to mentally prepare for what she knew would be a crucial strategy session. David's office was in a modern building near the courthouse, and Elena was relieved to see that no reporters had tracked her there yet. David met her in the parking garage and escorted her to his office through a private entrance, clearly taking her security concerns seriously. Elena, before we go any further, I need to review all the evidence you have about judicial corruption. If we're going to make these allegations, we need to be absolutely certain of our facts. Elena opened her laptop and spent the next 2 hours walking David through her documentation of the financial relationships between Patricia's firm and various court officials. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for: speaking fees, consulting contracts, and educational stipends that created ongoing financial relationships between attorneys and the judges who would be deciding their cases. This is devastating, David said finally. Elena, this evidence shows systematic corruption that could invalidate hundreds of custody cases over the past several years. Do you understand the magnitude of what you've uncovered? Elena nodded. Which is why Patricia is so desperate to discredit me before this becomes public. If these financial relationships are exposed, every case that involved these judges and attorneys will be subject to appeal. David leaned back in his chair, clearly overwhelmed by the implications. Elena, we need to involve federal authorities immediately. This kind of systematic corruption falls under federal jurisdiction, and the FBI has specialized units that handle judicial misconduct. I agree, but we need to coordinate carefully. Patricia is filing her contempt motion tomorrow morning, and if she succeeds in having me arrested, this evidence could disappear or be discredited before authorities can investigate properly. Elena had been thinking about timing and strategy for weeks, knowing that eventually she'd need to present her evidence in a way that would ensure its preservation and investigation. David, I want to schedule a press conference for tomorrow afternoon, immediately after Patricia's contempt hearing. Whether she succeeds or fails in having me charged, I'm going to present all of this evidence publicly and call for a federal investigation. David looked alarmed. Elena, that's incredibly risky. If you're charged with contempt, holding a press conference could be seen as defying the court. It could make your legal situation much worse. Or it could expose a level of corruption that makes my legal situation irrelevant, Elena replied. David, if what I've found is true, then the entire family court system in Denver is compromised. Sophia and I are just 2 victims among potentially hundreds. Elena's phone rang with a call from the investigative journalist she'd been working with. Elena, it's Rebecca Chen from the Washington Post. I've been reviewing the documents you sent, and I need to meet with you immediately. This story is bigger than either of us realized. Elena had contacted Rebecca 3 weeks earlier after reading her series on judicial corruption in family courts across several states. Rebecca had been investigating similar patterns in other jurisdictions and had been looking for sources in Colorado. Rebecca, I'm with my attorney right now. Can you meet us here? I'm actually in Denver already. I flew in this morning after hearing about your court hearing.
This story has national implications, and my editors want to move quickly. An hour later, Rebecca Chen arrived at David's office with a recording device and a thick folder of her own research. She was a woman in her 40s with the intense focus of someone who'd spent years investigating complex stories, and Elena immediately felt confident in her professionalism. Elena, what you've uncovered in Denver matches patterns I've been tracking in at least 6 other states. There appears to be a coordinated effort among certain family law attorneys to corrupt local court systems through financial relationships with judges and court-appointed professionals. Rebecca opened her folder and spread out documents that showed similar schemes in Phoenix, Atlanta, and Portland. The methodology is always the same. Identify judges who are receptive to traditional gender stereotypes about motherhood, establish financial relationships through legitimate-appearing consulting or speaking arrangements, and then systematically challenge mothers who don't conform to expected behavioral patterns.
Elena studied the documents, recognizing tactics that Patricia had used in her own case. Rebecca, are you saying this is a national network? I'm saying the evidence suggests coordination that goes beyond individual attorneys discovering similar tactics independently. There are conferences, training programs, and professional networks that appear to be sharing these strategies across state lines. David had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Rebecca, if this is a federal conspiracy, why haven't authorities investigated it before? Because until now, we haven't had someone with Elena's combination of legal knowledge, investigative skills, and documentary evidence willing to go on the record. Most victims of this system are isolated, overwhelmed, and convinced that they're the problem rather than recognizing the systemic nature of what they're experiencing. Rebecca turned to Elena with a serious expression. Elena, I need you to understand what you're taking on. If we publish this story, you'll be challenging some very powerful people who have a lot to lose. The retaliation could be severe and could extend beyond legal consequences. Elena had been thinking about this possibility for weeks, but hearing it stated so directly still sent a chill through her. Rebecca, what kind of retaliation are we talking about? Professional destruction, social isolation, potential physical threats. Elena, some of the people involved in these networks have connections that extend far beyond family law. They have relationships with political figures, law enforcement officials, and business leaders who benefit from the current system. Elena looked at Sophia, who was playing quietly with toys on David's office floor, completely oblivious to the adult conversation that would determine her future. Rebecca, what happens to children like Sophia if we don't expose this system? They continue to be used as pawns in a corrupt game where their welfare is secondary to financial and political interests. Elena, I've been investigating this story for 3 years, and I've seen dozens of children separated from loving parents because of manufactured evidence and biased evaluations. Elena made her decision. Rebecca, I'll do whatever is necessary to expose this system, but I need guarantees that the evidence will be preserved and investigated even if something happens to me. Rebecca nodded. I've already made arrangements with federal authorities. Your evidence has been copied and secured in multiple locations, and there are protocols in place to ensure investigation continues regardless of what happens to any individual source. Elena felt a mixture of relief and terror as she realized she just committed to a course of action that would either vindicate her completely or destroy her utterly. There was no middle ground anymore. Rebecca, when do you want to publish? Tomorrow evening, immediately after your press conference. We'll coordinate the timing to ensure maximum impact and protection for you and your evidence. Elena spent the rest of the evening at David's office, preparing for what she knew would be the most important day of her life. Tomorrow, she would either expose a corruption scandal that could reform family courts across the country, or she would be arrested and lose her daughter forever. But as she watched Sophia sleep peacefully in the portable crib David had arranged, Elena knew she'd made the right choice. Some battles were worth the risk, especially when the stakes were measured in the welfare of innocent children. The morning of the contempt hearing arrived gray and cold, with early winter clouds hanging low over downtown Denver. Elena had spent the night in a hotel room that David had arranged, knowing that reporters would be watching her apartment. She'd barely slept, but felt a strange calm as she prepared for what would either be her vindication or her destruction. Elena dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that conveyed professionalism without appearing too expensive. She wanted to look like a competent mother and paralegal, not a wealthy woman with resources to manipulate the system. Every detail mattered now that her case would be scrutinized by national media. David picked her up at the hotel with Sophia's car seat already installed in his Mercedes. Elena, are you sure you want to bring Sophia to the hearing? If things go badly, you might not get another chance to hold her for a long time. Elena had considered this question extensively. David, Sophia is what this is all about. If I'm going to fight for her future, she should be there to remind everyone what's at stake. The courthouse was surrounded by news vans and protesters when they arrived. Word of Elena's allegations had spread through social media overnight, and women's rights groups had organized a demonstration of support. Elena was surprised to see signs reading "Believe Mothers" and "End Judicial Corruption" being carried by dozens of women, many with children of their own.
But there were counter-protesters as well, holding signs that read, "Respect our courts and stop false accusations." Elena realized that her case had become a symbol of broader tensions about gender, power, and institutional credibility. Patricia Blackwell arrived at the courthouse in a black limousine, flanked by 2 junior associates and a public relations consultant. She looked confident and professional, playing the role of a respected attorney being falsely accused by an unstable client. The contrast between her expensive entourage and Elena's modest arrival was clearly intentional. Judge Hartwell's courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public who had been following the case. Elena noticed several people she recognized from her research: other attorneys who worked with Patricia, court officials who had financial relationships with her firm, and even some of the parents who had been involved in similar custody cases. "Your Honor," Patricia began when Judge Hartwell called the case, "we are here today because Ms. Martinez has engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, defamation, and criminal misconduct designed to interfere with legitimate legal proceedings. Her actions constitute not just contempt of court, but potentially serious felonies that demand immediate intervention." Patricia's presentation was masterful, painting Elena as an obsessed ex-wife who had used her technical skills to illegally access private communications and manufacture false evidence. She characterized her investigative work as stalking and harassment, and her exposure of Dr. Harrison's false credentials as a vindictive attack on an innocent professional. Furthermore, Your Honor, Ms. Martinez sent allegations against myself and other respected members of the Colorado legal community are clearly the product of paranoid delusions consistent with her documented mental health issues.
She has created an elaborate conspiracy theory to explain her inability to accept responsibility for her own behavior and parental shortcomings. Elena watched Judge Hartwell's face during Patricia's presentation and realized that he was predisposed to accept her narrative. His expressions of concern and occasional nods suggested that he found Patricia's characterization of Elena credible and concerning. When Patricia finished, Judge Hartwell turned to David with an expression that suggested the outcome was already decided. "Mr. Kim, these are very serious allegations against your client. How do you respond?" David stood with the confidence of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this moment. "Your Honor, the allegations against Ms. Martinez are not just false, they are part of a broader pattern of misconduct by opposing counsel that this court needs to address before proceeding with any sanctions." Elena saw Patricia's eyebrows raise slightly at David's aggressive tone. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Ms. Blackwell has been systematically corrupting family court proceedings through financial relationships with judges, court-appointed professionals, and expert witnesses. Ms. Martinez's investigation uncovered not just isolated incidents of misconduct, but a coordinated conspiracy to manipulate custody cases involving mothers who challenge traditional gender expectations." The courtroom fell completely silent at David's words. Judge Hartwell's face showed a mixture of surprise and anger that suggested he hadn't expected such a direct challenge to the court system itself. "Mr. Kim, you are making extremely serious allegations that go far beyond the scope of today's hearing. I hope you have substantial evidence to support such claims." David opened his briefcase and began distributing copies of Elena's research to the court, the opposing counsel, and the media representatives in the gallery. "Your Honor, we do. We have documentation of financial relationships between Miss Blackwell's firm and Your Honor that create clear conflicts of interest in this case." Judge Hartwell's face went pale as he realized that Elena's investigation had extended to his own conduct. Elena watched as he reviewed the documents showing payments from Patricia's firm to the Legal Education Foundation that had been funding his speaking engagements and continuing education. "Your Honor," David continued, "we also have evidence that Dr. Harrison, whose evaluation was central to the original custody determination, has been providing false expert testimony while misrepresenting his credentials. Ms. Blackwell was aware of these issues and continued to use Dr. Harrison's services because his biased evaluations served her client's interests." Elena could see Patricia frantically conferring with her associates as they realized the scope of evidence that Elena had gathered. What had started as a simple contempt hearing was becoming an exposure of systematic corruption that implicated multiple participants in Denver's family court system. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that this pattern extends beyond Denver to similar schemes in multiple states, suggesting a coordinated effort to manipulate family court proceedings on a national scale. Judge Hartwell was clearly struggling to process the magnitude of what David was presenting. The contempt hearing he had expected to conduct against Elena had become an indictment of his own court system and potentially his own conduct. Mr. Kim, these allegations require immediate investigation by appropriate authorities. I am suspending this hearing pending review by the Colorado Judicial Discipline Commission and potentially federal authorities. Elena felt a surge of relief and vindication as she realized that Judge Hartwell was essentially admitting that her evidence required serious investigation rather than dismissal as the delusions of an unstable mother. Patricia stood immediately. Your Honor, I object to this suspension. The evidence presented by Mr. Kim appears to be the same conspiracy theories that demonstrate Ms. Martinez's mental instability. Suspending proceedings based on such allegations validates her paranoid delusions and undermines the integrity of this court. Judge Hartwell looked directly at Patricia with an expression Elena had never seen him wear before. Ms. Blackwell, the financial documentation presented here is either accurate or falsified. If it's accurate, it raises serious questions about ethical conduct by multiple parties. If it's falsified, then Ms. Martinez has committed serious crimes. Either way, this matter requires investigation by authorities with greater resources than this court. Elena realized that Judge Hartwell was making a strategic decision to distance himself from the corruption allegations by calling for outside investigation. Whether he was actually innocent or simply covering his tracks, the result was the same. Elena's evidence would be investigated by federal authorities rather than dismissed by a local court. Therefore, I am suspending all proceedings in this case pending completion of investigations by appropriate authorities. Ms. Martinez's custody rights will remain as previously established, and no modifications will be made until these matters are resolved. Elena felt tears of relief beginning to form as she realized that she had not only avoided criminal charges, but had succeeded in forcing an investigation of the corruption she'd uncovered. As court adjourned, Elena could see Patricia gathering her materials with barely controlled fury. The contempt hearing that was supposed to destroy Elena had instead exposed Patricia to the kind of scrutiny that could end her career and potentially result in criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, Elena was surrounded by reporters asking for statements about her allegations and the suspended proceedings. Elena had prepared for this moment, knowing that her next words would shape how her story was presented to the public. I am a mother who loves her daughter and believes that all children deserve protection from adults who would manipulate legal systems for personal gain. What I uncovered in my case appears to be part of a broader pattern that has affected many families in Colorado and potentially other states. I hope that the investigations announced today will ensure that no other parent has to endure what my family has experienced. Elena's statement was measured and focused on child welfare rather than personal vindication, but she could see in the reporters' faces that they understood the broader implications of what had been revealed in court. As Elena walked away from the courthouse with David and Sophia, she knew that her public battle was just beginning. But for the first time in months, she felt confident that justice was possible, not just for her family, but for all the families who had been victimized by the system she had exposed. The afternoon press conference would reveal even more evidence, and Rebecca Chen's national story would ensure that the corruption Elena had uncovered would be investigated thoroughly. The perfect revenge against those who had underestimated her was exposing a system that needed to be reformed to protect innocent children. The FBI field office in downtown Denver was a stark contrast to the ornate courthouse where Elena had spent so many tense hours. Agent Sarah Morrison led Elena and David through sterile hallways lined with security cameras, the weight of federal authority palpable in every detail. Elena carried Sophia in her arms, the toddler's presence serving as a constant reminder of what was at stake in the investigation that would determine their future. Agent Morrison was a woman in her early 40s with the focused intensity of someone who had spent years investigating complex financial crimes. She had been assigned to Elena's case after Rebecca Chen's Washington Post article had prompted a coordinated federal response to the allegations of judicial corruption spanning multiple states. Ms. Martinez, before we begin, I want you to understand the scope of what we're investigating, Agent Morrison said as they settled into a conference room equipped with recording devices and multiple monitors. Your evidence regarding Denver's family court system appears to be part of a much larger pattern that we've been tracking across 17 states. Elena felt a chill as the magnitude of the conspiracy became clear. What she had uncovered in her own custody case was apparently just one small piece of a national network that had been operating for years. Agent Morrison, how many families are we talking about? Elena asked, Sophia playing quietly with toys that David had brought. Based on preliminary analysis, we're looking at potentially thousands of custody cases that may have been influenced by compromised professionals and corrupted proceedings. Ms. Martinez, what you've done by documenting and exposing this system in Denver has given us the evidence we needed to begin dismantling a network that has been operating with impunity for over a decade. Elena absorbed this information while watching Sophia stack colorful blocks, completely unaware that her mother's investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that affected children across the country. The responsibility felt overwhelming, but Elena also felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her fight for Sophia might protect countless other families. Agent Morrison opened a thick file containing hundreds of pages of documents. Ms. Martinez, we've verified the financial relationships you documented between Patricia Blackwell's firm and court officials. We've also confirmed that Dr. Harrison's credential misrepresentations extend to multiple jurisdictions where he's been providing expert testimony in custody cases. Elena had suspected that the corruption extended beyond Denver, but hearing federal confirmation made the scope feel almost surreal. Agent Morrison, what happens to the children whose custody was determined based on compromised evidence? That's where your case becomes particularly important. We need to establish a clear pattern of misconduct that can be used to challenge previous rulings and ensure that current cases are evaluated fairly. Your documentation and testimony will be crucial to achieving justice for all the affected families. Elena realized that her battle with Patricia Blackwell had evolved into something much larger than personal vindication. She was now a key witness in a federal investigation that could reform family court systems across the country. Agent Morrison, what about my own case? When will Sophia and I know whether our custody arrangement is secure? Agent Morrison's expression softened slightly. Ms. Martinez, based on the evidence you've provided and our ongoing investigation, I can tell you that the misconduct allegations against Patricia Blackwell and Dr. Harrison are substantiated. Your custody rights should be secure, but the formal resolution will depend on how quickly we can process the broader investigation. Elena felt relief flooding through her, but she also knew that Patricia Blackwell would not surrender quietly. A woman who had built her career on manipulating legal systems would undoubtedly have contingency plans for exactly this scenario. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood run cold. Federal investigations take years to complete. Accidents happen to people who make powerful enemies. Consider your daughter's safety before proceeding. This is your final warning. Elena immediately showed the message to Agent Morrison, whose expression became grimly serious. Ms. Martinez, this constitutes witness intimidation and threats against a federal witness. We're going to provide protection for you and Sophia while this investigation continues. Elena had been expecting retaliation, but the explicit threat against Sophia's safety crossed a line that transformed her anger into something much more dangerous. She had spent months being dismissed as an unstable mother, but now she felt the cold clarity of someone whose child had been threatened by people who had already demonstrated their willingness to corrupt legal systems for personal gain. Agent Morrison, I want to do everything possible to ensure this investigation succeeds. Whatever testimony you need, whatever evidence I can provide, whatever risk I need to take, these people have been destroying families for years, and it has to stop. Agent Morrison nodded approvingly. Miss Martinez, we're going to need extensive testimony about your interactions with Patricia Blackwell, Dr. Harrison, and the court officials involved in your case. We'll also need you to review case files from other jurisdictions to help us identify similar patterns of misconduct. Elena spent the next 4 hours at the FBI office, providing detailed testimony about every aspect of her custody case and the investigation that had led to the exposure of systematic corruption. Sophia napped in a portable crib that the agents had provided, creating a surreal contrast between the innocence of childhood and the gravity of federal law enforcement proceedings. As Elena recounted the timeline of her investigation, she realized how much her life had changed since that day in the Target baby formula aisle when she had first decided to fight back against the narrative of her incompetence. The woman who had been dismissed as suffering from baby brain had become a federal witness whose evidence could reform family court systems nationwide. Miss Martinez, one final question for today, Agent Morrison said as their session concluded. How did you maintain your focus and determination throughout this investigation while caring for a young child and dealing with the stress of custody proceedings? Elena considered the question carefully before responding. Agent Morrison, when someone tries to convince you that you're mentally incompetent, you have two choices: believe them and surrender, or prove them wrong by exceeding their expectations. I chose to prove them wrong, and in doing so, I discovered that I was much more capable than I had ever realized. Elena left the FBI office with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The federal investigation would continue for months, but the immediate threat to her custody had been neutralized. More importantly, the evidence she had gathered would ensure that Patricia Blackwell and her network of corrupt professionals would face consequences for their systematic manipulation of family court proceedings. Elena's phone rang with a call from Rebecca Chen at the Washington Post. Elena, my editors want to run a follow-up story about the federal investigation, and I need to update you on some developments that have emerged since my initial article was published. Elena accepted the call while securing Sophia in her car seat. Rebecca, what kind of developments? 3 more states have announced investigations into similar patterns of corruption in their family court systems.
Elena, your case has prompted a national examination of how custody cases involving maternal mental health allegations are handled. You've become the catalyst for what could be the most significant family court reform in decades. Elena felt overwhelmed by the scope of what her personal battle had unleashed. She had never intended to become a national figure or reform advocate, but the evidence she had uncovered demanded nothing less than systematic change. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. I'm not an activist or a reformer. I'm just a mother who refused to accept that loving my daughter made me mentally incompetent. Everything else grew out of that simple refusal to surrender. Elena, sometimes the most effective advocates are people who never intended to become advocates. Your credibility comes from the fact that you weren't pursuing a political agenda. You were simply trying to protect your child, and in doing so, you exposed a system that needed to be challenged. Elena drove home through Denver traffic, marveling at how different the city looked now that her long nightmare was finally ending. The apartment that had felt like a refuge during her separation now seemed like a temporary way station before the new life she would build with Sophia. Elena's phone buzzed with a call from David Kim. Elena, I have news that you need to hear immediately. Patricia Blackwell has been arrested by federal agents on charges related to the corruption investigation. Elena pulled over in a parking lot, needing to focus completely on David's words. David, what specific charges? Wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and violation of federal civil rights statutes. Elena, they're alleging that Patricia systematically deprived parents of their constitutional rights through corrupted legal proceedings. This is a major federal case that could result in decades in prison. Elena felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness as she processed the news. Patricia Blackwell had been a formidable adversary whose tactics had nearly destroyed Elena's family. But she was also a human being whose life was now in ruins because of choices she had made over many years. David, what about Dr. Harrison and the other professionals involved in the network? Dr. Harrison was arrested this morning on fraud charges related to his misrepresented credentials. Several judges have been suspended pending investigation, and at least 12 attorneys across multiple states are under federal scrutiny. Elena, What you uncovered has triggered the largest family court corruption investigation in U.S. history. Elena sat in her car holding her phone, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what her investigation had accomplished. The baby brain narrative that had been used to dismiss her capabilities had obscured the fact that she possessed exactly the combination of intelligence, determination, and legal knowledge necessary to expose a national conspiracy. David, when will I know that Sophia and I are completely safe from retaliation? Elena, with Patricia under federal indictment and her network being dismantled by multiple agencies, the immediate threat to your family is essentially eliminated. The people who might have been willing to intimidate a witness in a custody case are not going to risk federal charges for interfering with a national corruption investigation. Elena drove home with a sense of closure that she hadn't felt since her marriage began falling apart. The woman who had been characterized as too mentally unstable to make decisions about her own life had not only secured her daughter's future, but had exposed a system of corruption that had victimized countless families. Elena's apartment felt different when she entered with Sophia that evening. The space that had been a temporary refuge during her darkest period now felt like the foundation of a new life built on her own terms. Elena had proven to herself and the world that she was capable of far more than anyone had believed possible. Elena's phone rang with a call from Marcus, the first direct communication they'd had since the contempt hearing. Elena hesitated before answering, but curiosity about his perspective on recent events convinced her to take the call. "Elena, I need to talk to you." Marcus's voice was strained and unfamiliar. "I had no idea what Patricia was really doing. I thought I was just documenting legitimate concerns about your mental state." Elena felt anger rising as she listened to Marcus attempt to distance himself from the conspiracy that nearly destroyed her life. "Marcus, you collaborated with Patricia to manufacture evidence against me. You can't claim ignorance about a plan you actively participated in for months." "Elena, I know how this looks, but you have to understand that I genuinely believed you were struggling with mental health issues. Patricia convinced me that documenting those struggles was necessary to protect Sophia." Elena recognized the manipulation even in Marcus's attempt at reconciliation. He was still trying to portray her as the unstable party while positioning himself as a concerned father who had been misled by unethical counsel. "Marcus, federal agents have reviewed all of your communications with Patricia. They know exactly how much you knew about her tactics and when you knew it. Your attempts to minimize your involvement aren't going to change the evidence." There was a long pause before Marcus responded. "Elena, what do you want from me? Patricia is under federal indictment. My career is destroyed by association with this scandal, and I've lost any credibility I might have had regarding Sophia's custody. You've won everything." Elena realized that Marcus still didn't understand what their conflict had really been about. He saw it as a competition that she had won, rather than a fight for her fundamental rights as a mother and a human being. "Marcus, this was never about winning or losing. This was about your willingness to participate in systematically undermining my mental competence rather than addressing whatever legitimate concerns you might have had about our marriage or my parenting. Elena, can we find a way to co-parent Sophia that doesn't involve ongoing legal warfare? I know I made mistakes, but she needs both of her parents." Elena considered Marcus's request carefully. The anger and hurt that had driven her investigation were still present, but they were now tempered by the knowledge that she had achieved something far more significant than personal revenge. "Marcus, Sophia does need both of her parents, but only if those parents can provide stable, honest relationships. Your participation in Patricia's conspiracy demonstrated that you were willing to sacrifice my well-being and our daughter's best interests for your own convenience." Elena paused, watching Sophia play with her toys, completely oblivious to the adult conversation that would shape her future relationships with both parents. "Marcus, if you want to be part of Sophia's life going forward, you need to demonstrate through your actions that you understand the harm you caused and that you're committed to being a better father than you were a husband." Marcus's voice was subdued when he responded.
Elena, what would that look like practically? Therapy, to understand why you were willing to participate in a conspiracy against Sophia's mother. Full cooperation with the federal investigation, including testimony about Patricia's tactics and your own involvement, and a willingness to accept that I will have primary custody while you work to rebuild your credibility as a parent. Elena realized that she was offering Marcus something that Patricia's network had tried to deny her: the opportunity to prove his fitness as a parent through his actions rather than through manipulation of legal systems. Elena, I'll do whatever is necessary to maintain a relationship with Sophia. You're right that I made terrible choices, and I need to take responsibility for the consequences. After ending the call with Marcus, Elena felt a sense of resolution that went beyond legal victory. The man who had participated in systematically undermining her mental competence was now acknowledging her authority to determine the terms of their future relationship. Elena spent the evening playing with Sophia and preparing dinner in their small kitchen, marveling at how normal domestic activities felt after months of legal warfare and federal investigations. The woman who had been characterized as too unstable to manage basic household tasks was now managing the complexities of a national corruption case while providing stable care for her daughter. Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Agent Morrison. Federal grand jury has returned indictments against Patricia Blackwell, Dr. Harrison, and 14 other defendants across 7 states. Your testimony was crucial to achieving these results. Justice is being served. Elena read the message twice, letting the reality of federal justice sink in. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her family was now being prosecuted by the full weight of the federal government, and the evidence she had gathered would ensure that the defendants faced serious consequences for their systematic corruption. Elena's laptop chimed with an email from Rebecca Chen containing a link to the Washington Post's follow-up article about the federal indictments. The headline read, "Mother's investigation leads to largest family court corruption prosecution in U.S. history." Elena read the article with a mixture of pride and surreal disbelief. The woman who had been dismissed as suffering from baby brain was now being credited with exposing a national conspiracy that had affected thousands of families. The narrative had been completely inverted. Instead of a mentally unstable mother making paranoid accusations, Elena was now recognized as an intelligent investigator whose work had served the public interest. The article quoted several legal experts praising Elena's investigative methodology and her courage in challenging powerful institutions. One professor from Harvard Law School described Elena's work as a masterclass in how individual citizens can hold corrupt systems accountable when official oversight fails. Elena realized that her story would now be part of the public record, not as a cautionary tale about maternal mental health issues, but as an example of how systematic injustice could be challenged by determined individuals who refuse to accept false narratives about their own capabilities. Elena's phone rang with a call from a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a woman's voice introduced herself as Dr. Lisa Thompson, a researcher at Georgetown University who studied family court systems. Miss Martinez, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to thank you for what you've accomplished. I've been researching family court bias for 15 years, and your case has provided the breakthrough that advocacy groups have been working toward for decades. Elena was surprised by the call, but pleased to hear from someone whose academic work aligned with her practical experience. Dr. Thompson, I appreciate your call, but I need you to understand that I never intended to become an advocate or reformer. I was just trying to protect my daughter. Miss Martinez, that's exactly what makes your work so powerful. You weren't pursuing a theoretical agenda about family court reform. You were responding to immediate threats to your family, which gave you the motivation and focus necessary to uncover evidence that professional researchers had been unable to obtain. Dr. Thompson continued, Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to speak at academic conferences about your experience? The legal community needs to understand how systematic bias operates in practice and how individual families can challenge corrupted proceedings. Elena considered the invitation carefully. The idea of speaking publicly about her experience felt both appealing and terrifying, but she also recognized that her story could help other families facing similar challenges. Dr. Thompson, I would be willing to share my experience if it could help other parents, but I need to be clear about my limitations. I'm not a lawyer or an academic researcher. I'm a mother who learned family law out of necessity. Ms. Martinez, that's exactly what makes your work so powerful. You weren't pursuing a theoretical agenda about family court reform. You were responding to immediate threats to your family, which gave you the motivation and focus necessary to uncover evidence that professional researchers had been unable to obtain. Dr. Thompson continued, Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to speak at academic conferences about your experience?
The legal community needs to understand how systematic bias operates in practice and how individual families can challenge corrupted proceedings. Elena considered the invitation carefully. The idea of speaking publicly about her experience felt both appealing and terrifying, but she also recognized that her story could help other families facing similar challenges. Dr. Thompson, I would be willing to share my experience if it could help other parents, but I need to be clear about my limitations. I'm not a lawyer or an academic researcher. I'm a mother who learned family law out of necessity. Ms. Martinez, that's exactly the perspective that's been missing from academic discussions about family court reform. We have plenty of theoretical knowledge about how these systems should work, but we need practical knowledge about how they actually work when parents are facing systematic bias. Dr. Thompson continued, Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to speak at academic conferences about your experience? The legal community needs to understand how systematic bias operates in practice and how individual families can challenge corrupted proceedings. Elena considered the invitation carefully. The idea of speaking publicly about her experience felt both appealing and terrifying, but she also recognized that her story could help other families facing similar challenges. Dr. Thompson, I would be willing to share my experience if it could help other parents, but I need to be clear about my limitations. I'm not a lawyer or an academic researcher. I'm a mother who learned family law out of necessity. Ms. Martinez, that's exactly the perspective that's been missing from academic discussions about family court reform. We have plenty of theoretical knowledge about how these systems should work, but we need practical knowledge about how they actually work when parents are facing systematic bias. Elena agreed to consider speaking opportunities once the federal investigation was complete and her family situation was fully stabilized. She realized that her experience could serve a purpose beyond her own vindication if it helped other parents recognize and challenge similar corruption. Elena spent the following weeks adjusting to a new reality where she was no longer fighting for her basic rights as a mother, but instead managing the aftermath of a victory that had exceeded her wildest expectations. The apartment that had been a refuge during her legal battle was now a peaceful home where she could focus on Sophia's development without the constant stress of custody proceedings. Elena's phone rang with a call from David Kim with news that would mark the final resolution of her custody case. Elena, Judge Chen has been assigned to finalize your custody arrangement now that the federal investigation has concluded the Denver portion of their case. She wants to meet with both you and Marcus to establish a permanent custody order. Elena felt nervous excitement as she realized that her legal battle was finally approaching its conclusion. David, what should I expect from this meeting? Judge Chen has reviewed all the evidence from the federal investigation, and she's made it clear that she considers the original custody proceedings to have been fundamentally corrupted by Patricia's misconduct. She wants to establish a new arrangement based on actual evidence about each parent's capabilities. Elena met with Judge Chen the following week in a conference room setting rather than a formal courtroom, creating an atmosphere more conducive to problem-solving than adversarial proceedings. Marcus attended with a new attorney, his demeanor notably subdued compared to his earlier confidence during Patricia's representation. Judge Chen began the meeting by acknowledging the unique circumstances that had brought them together. Ms. Martinez, your investigation into the misconduct that affected your case has resulted in significant reforms to how our family court system operates. I want to ensure that your final custody arrangement reflects both your demonstrated capabilities as a mother and the lessons we've learned about preventing systematic bias. Elena felt vindicated by Judge Chen's acknowledgement of her capabilities, but she also recognized that the judge is genuinely committed to ensuring Sophia's best interests, rather than simply rewarding Elena for exposing corruption.
Martinez, based on the evidence presented during the federal investigation, it's clear that you possess exceptional intelligence, determination, and parental dedication. The narrative of mental incompetence that was used against you was not only false, but was deliberately manufactured to serve interests that had nothing to do with your daughter's welfare. Judge Chen turned to Marcus with a more stern expression. Mr. Rodriguez, your participation in the systematic undermining of your daughter's mother represents a serious failure of parental judgment that this court cannot ignore. However, Sophia benefits from having relationships with both parents when those relationships are healthy and honest. Elena listened as Judge Chen outlined a custody arrangement that granted her primary physical custody while providing Marcus with supervised visitation that could expand to unsupervised time based on his progress in therapy and his demonstration of commitment to Sophia's best interests.
Mr. Rodriguez, your future relationship with your daughter depends on your willingness to take responsibility for your actions and to demonstrate through consistent behavior that you can be a positive influence in her life. Elena felt satisfied with the custody arrangement, which recognized both her primary role in Sophia's life and the possibility that Marcus could earn a more significant parental role through genuine change and accountability. After the meeting concluded, Elena and Marcus walked together to the courthouse parking garage, their first private conversation since his earlier phone call acknowledging his mistakes. Elena, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm committed to doing whatever is necessary to be a good father to Sophia, Marcus said as they reached their cars. Elena studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus strategic positioning. Marcus, Sophia needs consistency and honesty from the adults in her life. If you can provide those things, you'll have opportunities to build a meaningful relationship with her. Elena paused before continuing. Marcus, I need you to understand something important. The woman you tried to portray as mentally incompetent was always capable of what I've accomplished. The only difference is that your betrayal forced me to discover capabilities I hadn't needed to use before. Marcus nodded, his expression showing what appeared to be genuine shame about his participation in Patricia's conspiracy. Elena, I underestimated you completely, and that underestimation led me to make choices that nearly destroyed our daughter's family. I hope I can spend the rest of my life making up for those mistakes. Elena drove home from the courthouse with Sophia, singing children's songs from her car seat, the sound of pure joy providing a perfect soundtrack for the end of the longest and most difficult chapter of their lives. The woman who had been dismissed as suffering from baby brain had not only secured her daughter's future, but had reformed systems that would protect countless other families. Elena's apartment felt like a real home for the first time since her separation from Marcus. The space that had been a temporary refuge during her legal battle was now the foundation of a life built on her own terms, with her own capabilities, and according to her own values. Elena's phone rang with a call from Agent Morrison providing a final update on the federal investigation. Ms. Martinez, I wanted to let you know that Patricia Blackwell has agreed to a plea deal that includes significant prison time and cooperation with ongoing investigations in other states. Your evidence was crucial to achieving this result. Elena felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness as she processed the news. Patricia Blackwell had been a formidable adversary whose corruption had nearly destroyed Elena's family. But she was also a human being whose life had been ruined by choices that had seemed to serve her professional interests. Agent Morrison, what happens to the families whose cases were affected by Patricia's misconduct? Ms. Martinez, your case has established legal precedents that are being used to challenge corrupted custody proceedings across multiple states. Hundreds of families are having their cases reviewed, and many parents are being reunited with children who were separated based on manufactured evidence. Elena realized that her personal battle had achieved something far more significant than individual vindication. The evidence she had gathered and the precedents established through her case would protect families for years to come. Elena spent the evening reading to Sophia and reflecting on the journey that had transformed her from a woman dismissed as mentally incompetent into a federal witness whose work had reformed family court systems nationwide. The baby brain narrative that had been used to undermine her credibility had obscured the fact that she possessed exactly the combination of intelligence, determination, and moral clarity necessary to challenge systematic corruption. Elena's laptop chimed with an email from Georgetown University offering her a position as a research associate studying family court bias and reform. The offer included opportunities to complete a law degree while working on projects designed to prevent the kind of corruption she had exposed. Elena read the offer with excitement and apprehension. The opportunity represented everything she had discovered about her own capabilities, but it also meant embracing a public role as an advocate and reformer that she had never sought. Elena looked at Sophia, who was playing peacefully with her toys, completely trusting that her mother would make whatever decisions were necessary to ensure their security and happiness. Elena realized that her daughter deserved to grow up with a mother who fully embraced her own capabilities, rather than hiding from opportunities out of fear or modesty. Elena drafted a response accepting Georgetown's offer and outlining her vision for research that would empower other parents to recognize and challenge systematic bias in family court proceedings.
The woman who had been characterized as too mentally unstable to make decisions about her own life was now being offered opportunities to influence policy that would protect families nationwide. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca Chen. Elena, your story continues to inspire families across the country who are facing similar challenges. You've shown that individual determination can challenge even the most entrenched systems of power and corruption. Thank you for your courage. Elena smiled as she read Rebecca's message, realizing that her story would now be part of a larger narrative about how ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept false limitations placed on their capabilities. Elena spent the final evening in the Denver apartment that had been her refuge during the darkest period of her life, packing belongings for the move to Washington, D.C., where she would begin law school and her research position at Georgetown. The space that had felt temporary and constrained now seemed symbolic of a transitional period that had transformed her understanding of her own potential. Elena's phone rang with a call from Sophia's pediatrician's office, a routine appointment reminder that represented the kind of normal parental responsibility she could now handle without fear that every interaction would be documented as evidence of her incompetence. Elena realized that the victory she had achieved went far beyond securing custody of Sophia or exposing Patricia Blackwell's corruption. She had reclaimed her own narrative from people who had tried to define her capabilities according to their interests rather than reality. Elena carried Sophia to the window of their apartment for a final look at the Denver skyline, the city where she had fought and won the most important battle of her life. The woman who had been dismissed as suffering from baby brain was now recognized as an intelligent advocate whose work would protect families for generations to come. Elena whispered to Sophia, "We're going to build a life where no one gets to tell us what we're capable of except ourselves." Sophia giggled and pointed at the city lights, completely confident in her mother's ability to provide whatever future they needed. Elena closed the apartment door behind them for the final time, carrying Sophia toward a future built on the foundation of capabilities that had always existed, but had never been fully recognized or utilized. The perfect revenge against those who underestimated her was becoming everything they had claimed she could never be: a successful professional, a capable mother, and a person whose intelligence and determination had served not just her own family, but countless others who deserved protection from systemic corruption. The baby brain narrative had been permanently replaced by a story of intellectual achievement, moral courage, and the kind of determination that could challenge the most powerful institutions when justice demanded it. Elena Martinez had proven that underestimating a mother's intelligence and capability was not just wrong, but dangerous for anyone who built their power on such false assumptions. Sophia's laughter echoed through the apartment hallway as Elena carried her toward their new life, the sound of pure joy serving as the perfect conclusion to a story that had begun with dismissal and ended with triumph beyond anything Elena had ever imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.